I need to play 3 times before I kind of understand. A preliminary exploration of players' reasons for and against replaying a visual novel. A paper by Biying, Wang, Abel, Beng, Heng, and Alex Mitchell, National University of Singapore. Introduction. The replay of interactive stories is an essential characteristic of the medium. However, little work has been done to investigate what motivates people to replay interactive stories, or when and why they stop replaying. Through an exploratory qualitative empirical study of 12 participants aged 22 to 28, replaying the visual novel The Shadows That Run Alongside Our Car, this paper investigates what players consider to be their reasons for replaying, and at what point they decide not to engage in further replay. There has been some related work looking at why people reread non-interactive stories. According to Galef, 1998, rereading is an experience, not merely an active retrieval, and repetition does more than deepen experience. According to Iser, 1980, during the process of reading, there is an active interweaving of anticipation and retrospection, which on second reading may turn into a kind of advanced retrospection. According to Calinescu, rereading can be classified into partial, simple, and reflective rereading. Partial rereading involves filling in gaps and blanks that you missed the first time. Simple rereading involves recapturing the experience of the first reading. And reflective rereading involves looking for deeper meanings, connections, and how a text works as a text. In terms of work on rereading of interactive stories, Mitchell, in 2012, following Calinescu, sees rereading an interactive story as involving a movement from partial or closure-oriented to simple or reflective rereading. Only when people reach both narrative and system closure will they be motivated to engage in reflective rereading. In more recent work, Mitchell, Quay, and Lee suggest that players need to maintain a sense of story gameness to be motivated to reread beyond closure. And most recently, Mitchell and Quay introduced the concept of kaleidoscopic rereading, which they claim involves moving back and forth between partial and reflective rereading, rather than moving in a linear path from partial to simple or reflective rereading. So this brings us to our research questions. Recent investigations question earlier theories of replay and rereading. There has also been little empirical work to investigate replay of story games. So we decided to use qualitative empirical methods to investigate. First, what reasons do players give for choosing to replay a visual novel? Second, at what point do players choose to cease to replay, and what reasons do they give for stopping? I'll now describe our methodology. First, data collection. 12 participants aged 22 to 28 played and replayed The Shadows That Run Alongside Our Car. At the end of each playthrough, participants were asked briefly what they were looking for when they were interacting with the work, whether they wanted to play the game again, and if so, what they were trying to achieve by replaying. If participants did not want to replay, they were asked why not. Then they were asked to play again. After 3 playthroughs, we conducted a semi-structured interview with video-cued recall to stimulate conversation. The first author ran 8 sessions, whereas the second author ran 4 sessions. In terms of data analysis, the researcher who ran the session transcribed that session. All 3 authors carried out descriptive, axial, and hierarchical coding. This can be described as what Tracy calls frenetic iterative analysis. During the final round of hierarchical coding, the authors worked together to come up with a combined set of categories. These categories form the basis for our results. According to Mitchell, 2012, motivations for rereading can shift from partial to simple or reflective reading in a somewhat linear process. Here instead we saw what we could see as parallel processing, with multiple goals and reasons for replaying happening at the same time. Both partial and reflective rereading happened simultaneously, and participants tended to shift back to partial rereading even after they reached closure. Closure-oriented replay was also sometimes involving reflective replay. We would suggest that this is a form of kaleidoscopic closure, where players are looking for both narrative and system closure and motivated to see both variation and meaning at the same time. In terms of reasons for stopping replaying, participants suggested that seeing variation isn't enough. They wanted more than that. In fact, sometimes too much variation can also be a problem, as it disrupts any sense of closure. What we saw happening was that there was an ongoing cost-benefit analysis happening. Players would think, am I going to see something new? Is it worth replaying? And they would continuously be making this decision as to whether they should go back and play again. So, in conclusion, this suggests that rather than initially working towards closure in a manner analogous to Calinescu's partial rereading, and only after reaching closure shifting to either simple or reflective rereading, as Mitchell had originally described, Participants were instead engaged in parallel in something like both partial and reflective rereading. They potentially moved from thinking they had reached closure to feeling that there was actually something more to be seen, as their estimation of the potential of encountering new material changed. This suggests that they were in fact engaged in a form of cost-benefit analysis, weighing the effort required to replay against the potential to see either something new or to reach narrative closure. So this parallel process of partial and reflective rereading and the fluid shifting between closure and a desire to continue replaying is quite different from the more sequential process described by Mitchell in 2012, and is closer to the descriptions of replay and more complex works reported by Mitchell, Quay, and Lee in 2020 and Mitchell and Quay in 2020. So our observations can actually provide some preliminary empirical grounded support for Mitchell and Quay's call to rethink and extend earlier somewhat simplistic models of rereading in interactive stories to account for the complex interactions between the player's desire for narrative and system closure and their desire to see something new. Thank you.